The ancient oak door creaked open, sending a family of field mice scattering across the weathered floorboards. Eliza Montgomery stood frozen in the doorway, her calloused hands gripping a shotgun as she counted the hungry faces outside her barn. 4 figures huddled against the bitter December wind, a mother, painfully thin, clutching 3 small girls with hollow cheeks who gnawed desperately on rotten apples fallen from Eliza's forgotten orchard. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eliza had been inspecting her property when she spotted the intruders, but this wasn't about trespassing or petty theft. The mother wore clothes that once belonged to someone of means, a tattered silk blouse and a skirt with delicate embroidery. Now caked with mud, her daughters in similarly worn dresses. Their leader, the eldest girl no more than 10, stood protectively before her siblings with fierce determination beyond her years. "Please don't report us, ma'am," the mother called, her voice carrying the refined accent of formal education, despite her desperate circumstances. "We'll leave immediately. We meant no harm." The woman's hand trembled as she gathered her daughters closer, preparing to flee into the gathering darkness of the Colorado wilderness. At 42, Eliza's body still carried the wiry strength of someone who'd worked the land alone for 2 decades, though premature silver streaked the auburn hair tied back in a practical braid. The deep lines around her eyes and mouth spoke of hard winters and solitary struggles. Her worn flannel shirt and canvas trousers marked her as what the townsfolk called that peculiar Montgomery woman, though those who knew her history understood. She was simply a survivor who preferred her own company to the judgment of others. Another gust of wind sent the smallest girl, perhaps only 4 years old, into a fit of shivering. Eliza watched as the mother instantly removed her own threadbare shawl to wrap around the child, leaving herself exposed to the elements without hesitation. The gesture sent a jolt of recognition through Eliza's heart. Wordlessly, Eliza set her shotgun against the barn wall. She unbuttoned her heavy wool coat and held it out toward the family. "Come in," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "Night's coming and the temperature's dropping. No one should be outside in this cold." The mother hesitated, suspicion warring with desperation in her eyes. "Why would you help us?" Eliza didn't immediately answer. How could she explain the promise she'd made 15 years ago? A promise that had cost her everything she held dear and driven her to this remote farmstead where her nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. The memory hit her with physical force, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday rather than a decade and a half in the past. April 17th, 1883, the night that had changed everything. Eliza had been working as the head nurse at Millfield County Hospital when the catastrophic flooding began. What started as spring rain had turned into a deluge that collapsed the dam upstream from town. The hospital, situated on higher ground, had quickly become an island of safety in a drowning community. Dr. James Richardson, the chief physician, and Eliza's mentor, had been coordinating evacuation efforts when the 2nd floor collapsed beneath him. Eliza had found him pinned under a support beam, water already rising around them. She had tried desperately to free him, but both knew it was impossible. "You need to go, Eliza," Richardson had whispered, his breathing growing labored as internal injuries took their toll. "The others need you more than I do now." "I'm not leaving you," she had replied, still struggling with the immovable beam. Richardson had caught her wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me. I've watched you for years, Montgomery. You've saved more lives than any doctor in this hospital. These deaths tonight, they don't define you unless you let them." Eliza had knelt beside the dying doctor, moved by something in the man's unwavering certainty. "What would you have me do? The damage is done." "Make it right," Richardson had gasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "There are others who need protection, others who have no one. Promise me you'll use your skills to help those who can't help themselves. Promise me you'll be the healer you were meant to be." The promise had seemed simple enough at the time. Eliza had given her word to a dying man, thinking it was just the final request of someone facing eternity. She had no idea it would tear apart everything she had built, everything she loved, everything that gave her life meaning. When Eliza returned to her family and told her husband Thomas about the promise, about her intention to honor Richardson's dying wish by using her medical skills to help anyone who needed care regardless of their ability to pay, the reaction was immediate and devastating. Thomas was a practical man with ambitions of social climbing. He saw his wife's promise as financial suicide and an embarrassment to his rising status in the community. When Eliza opened a free clinic for the poor in the flood's aftermath, using their savings to fund it, the arguments began. "These people have nothing to offer us in return," Thomas had said, his voice cold with disapproval. "We've worked too hard to throw everything away on strangers." Worst of all was the reaction of her sister Margaret, who had looked at Eliza with eyes full of betrayal. Margaret had been counting on Eliza's nursing income to help pay for her son's education at medical school. "How can you choose strangers over your own family?" she had demanded. Eliza had tried to explain about honor, about the weight of a dying man's final words, about her belief that healing should be available to everyone regardless of social standing. But her family saw only betrayal, only a woman who had chosen outsiders over her own blood. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The final confrontation came when Eliza announced her intention to travel to isolated communities that had no access to medical care. Thomas had stood before her in their bedroom, his face flushed with anger, an ultimatum on his lips. "If you leave us for them," he had said quietly, "don't ever come back. I won't have a wife who values strangers more than her own husband." Eliza had left at dawn the next morning, carrying nothing but her medical bag and the crushing weight of choosing between two different kinds of honor. She had not seen Thomas or Margaret since, though she heard through occasional travelers that Thomas had remarried, and her nephew had abandoned his medical studies for a career in banking. For 15 years, she had wandered the frontier, keeping her promise to Richardson by helping anyone she encountered who needed medical care, regardless of their circumstances. She had delivered babies in mining camps, treated gunshot wounds in lawless towns, and stopped more than one epidemic through proper sanitation and quarantine. But each act of healing only deepened her isolation, reminding her of what her choice had cost. Now, looking at the desperate mother and her 3 hungry daughters, Eliza recognized herself as she had been all those years ago, someone facing an impossible choice between self-preservation and helping those in need. "I help because someone once showed me that true healing isn't just about medicine," Eliza said finally, still holding out her coat. "It's about seeing suffering and not looking away." After a moment's hesitation, the mother stepped forward, guiding her children toward the warmth of Eliza's barn. "I'm Rebecca," she said quietly. "Rebecca Wellington. These are my daughters, Charlotte, Emma, and little Sophia." Eliza nodded, noting how the girls stayed close to their mother, their eyes wary but hopeful. They moved with the cautious steps of people accustomed to rejection and disappointment. As they entered the barn, Eliza noticed Charlotte, the eldest, slip something into her pocket, a small knife likely for protection. The girl met Eliza's gaze defiantly, but Eliza simply gestured toward the lantern-lit interior. "There's a wood stove in the back," she said. "Get yourselves warm while I bring some proper food from the house." As Eliza walked the short distance to her cabin, her mind raced with questions. The Wellingtons weren't ordinary drifters. Rebecca's speech and bearing suggested education and refinement, and the girls, despite their obvious hunger, had the kind of careful manners that spoke of a genteel upbringing. Something had driven this family from comfort to desperation, and Eliza suspected it was more than simple misfortune. When she returned with a basket of bread, cheese, and dried apples, she found Rebecca attempting to clean her daughters' faces with a handkerchief that had seen better days. The girls sat quietly on a hay bale, their thin shoulders finally relaxing in the warm air near the stove. Eliza set down the food, noting how the children's eyes widened at the sight. "Eat slowly," she cautioned. "Your stomachs need time to remember what real food is." Rebecca nodded gratefully, carefully breaking the bread into small pieces for her daughters. "We haven't had a proper meal in 3 days," she admitted. "I didn't want to steal, but the children were so hungry, and those fallen apples seemed like they wouldn't be missed." "They wouldn't have been," Eliza confirmed, settling onto a nearby stool. "I don't bother harvesting from that old orchard anymore. Too many for one person." As the family ate, Eliza observed them with a healer's eye. All 4 showed signs of prolonged malnutrition, the dull sheen to their hair, the papery quality of their skin, the slight tremor in their hands. But there was something else too. The way they started at small noises, the cautious glances toward the barn door, the tension that never quite left Rebecca's shoulders, even as she fed her children. "You're running from something," Eliza said finally. It wasn't a question. Rebecca's hand froze midway to her mouth. "What makes you say that?" "I've treated enough people in trouble to recognize the signs," Eliza replied. "You don't have to tell me, but if there's danger coming, I should know about it." Charlotte, the eldest girl, spoke up unexpectedly. "It's not something, it's someone. And he won't stop looking for us, no matter how far we run." "Charlotte," Rebecca cautioned, but the girl continued, her young face hardening with a maturity beyond her years. "It's Mr. Hargrove," Charlotte said. "Mother's new husband. He's the reason we had to leave Boston." Rebecca sighed, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Charlotte is right," she admitted to Eliza. "Edward Hargrove is my second husband. I married him after the girl's father, Jonathan, died of pneumonia 2 years ago. Edward seemed kind at first, generous even. He's a banker with significant influence in Boston society." Her voice lowered as she continued, "But once the marriage was official, everything changed. He began controlling our every movement, our finances, even who we could speak to. And then—" She glanced at her daughters, clearly reluctant to continue in their presence. Eliza understood immediately. She had treated too many women with bruises they couldn't explain and broken bones that didn't match their stories of accidents. She nodded slightly to show Rebecca she didn't need to elaborate. "We left 3 weeks ago," Rebecca continued, "in the middle of the night, with nothing but the clothes we were wearing and a small amount of money I'd managed to hide. Edward has connections everywhere in the East. We thought heading west, where he has fewer acquaintances, might give us a chance to disappear." "But he's still looking," Emma, the middle daughter, added quietly. "We saw men asking questions in the last town. They had our descriptions." Eliza considered this information carefully. A wealthy Boston banker with connections would indeed have the resources to pursue his runaway wife across the country. And if he was the type of man who used his fists against his family, he wouldn't hesitate to employ more dangerous methods to retrieve what he considered his property. "You'll stay here tonight," Eliza decided. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "We can't impose. You've already been too kind, and we've brought nothing but danger to your door." Eliza stood, gathering the empty dishes. "I've faced worse dangers," she said simply. "Get some rest. The loft has clean hay, and I'll bring blankets from the house." As she walked back to her cabin for the second time that evening, Eliza felt a familiar sense of purpose stirring within her. For 15 years, she had traveled from crisis to crisis, helping where she could before moving on. But something about Rebecca Wellington and her daughters felt different, perhaps because they reminded her so vividly of the choices that had defined her own life. Inside her small but tidy cabin, Eliza lit the oil lamp on her desk and pulled out a weathered journal. Its pages contained names, dates, and locations, a record of all the people she had helped over the years. She turned to a blank page and wrote "Wellington family" with today's date, then paused, her pen hovering over the paper. Helping the Wellingtons would mean more than a night's shelter or a meal. A man like Edward Hargrove wouldn't give up easily, especially if his pride was wounded by his wife's escape. Protecting this family would require resources, connections, and possibly confronting the kind of violence Eliza had spent years treating but never inflicting. She closed the journal and moved to the trunk at the foot of her bed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and untouched for over a decade, lay the silver-handled revolver her father had given her when she first set out as a traveling nurse. "The frontier is no place for an unarmed woman," he had said. Eliza had carried it faithfully, but had never fired it at anything more threatening than a warning shot to scare off wolves. Tomorrow might change that, if Hargrove's men were indeed following the Wellingtons' trail. It wouldn't be long before they appeared at her farm. Eliza would need to make preparations, not just for defense, but for helping the family escape to somewhere truly safe. As she gathered blankets for her guests, Eliza felt the weight of Richardson's dying words pressing on her conscience once again. "Use your skills to help those who can't help themselves." For 15 years, she had interpreted that promise through the lens of her medical training, but perhaps it had always meant something broader, something that included standing between danger and those too vulnerable to face it alone. The wind had picked up outside, carrying the first hints of snow. Winter was coming early to the Colorado highlands, which would make travel difficult, but might also cover the Wellingtons' tracks. Eliza would need to plan carefully, drawing on contacts she hadn't spoken to in years and resources she had carefully hoarded. As she returned to the barn with her arms full of blankets, Eliza found the family already asleep, huddled together on the clean hay she had pointed out earlier. Even in sleep, Rebecca kept her arms protectively around her daughters, her body positioned between them and the barn door. Eliza spread the blankets gently over the sleeping family, her mind already mapping out the challenges ahead. She would need supplies, transportation, and information about Hargrove's men, how many there were, how close they had come, and what they knew about the Wellingtons' destination. But as she tucked the blanket around little Sophia, whose tiny hand clutched a piece of bread even in sleep, Eliza felt a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever came next, whatever danger Hargrove presented, she would face it. Not because of an old promise, though that still guided her actions, but because 4 innocent lives now depended on her courage and resourcefulness. As Eliza returned to her cabin to prepare for whatever tomorrow might bring, she realized something that brought a faint smile to her weather-worn face. For 15 years, she had wandered alone, helping strangers before moving on to the next crisis. But something about the Wellingtons had awakened a longing she thought she'd buried alongside her old life. A longing for connection, for purpose, beyond the moment, for the chance to make a lasting difference rather than a temporary one. Tomorrow would determine whether that longing was merely wishful thinking or the first step toward a new chapter in her solitary life. Either way, Eliza Montgomery would face it with the same quiet determination that had carried her through 15 years of exile. Because some promises, once made, became part of a person's soul. Breaking them meant destroying something fundamental about who she was meant to be. The rising sun cast long shadows across Eliza's property as she filled a bucket at the well. Her mind raced with plans and contingencies, while her body moved through the familiar morning routine. After 15 years of solitary living, having 4 extra people under her care required adjustments to her carefully ordered existence. But something about the challenge felt right, as if the isolated life she'd built had always been waiting for this moment of disruption. As she approached the barn, Charlotte emerged, rubbing sleep from her eyes but alert, her young shoulders already carrying the watchfulness of someone older. The girl had positioned herself where she could see both the main road and the path to Eliza's cabin, a sentry protecting her family even as they slept. "Good morning," Eliza said, setting down the water bucket. "There's soap in the small tin. Your mother and sister's still sleeping." Charlotte nodded, her eyes never leaving the distant tree line. Mother was awake most of the night. She always is, listening for his footsteps. The simple statement revealed volumes about the family's recent life. The constant vigilance, the trauma that followed them even in sleep. Eliza recognized the pattern from her years treating women escaping violent homes. The physical wounds healed far quicker than the invisible ones. "Your mother's smart to be cautious," Eliza said, pulling a loaf of fresh bread from her basket. "But you're safe here for now. Have something to eat while I check on them." Inside the barn, Rebecca was already awake, helping her younger daughters wash their faces with a dampened handkerchief. The transformation of a single night's proper rest was remarkable. Despite their continued wariness, the family's movements were more deliberate, less frantic than the previous evening. "We can't thank you enough," Rebecca began, but Eliza shook her head. "Save your thanks. We have decisions to make and not much time to make them." She gestured toward the cabin. "Come have breakfast while we talk." As they walked the short distance between buildings, Eliza noted how Rebecca constantly scanned their surroundings, her body positioned to gather her daughters at the first sign of trouble. It was the instinctive behavior of prey that had narrowly escaped a predator once, and lived with the certainty that another attack was inevitable. Inside the cabin, the family hesitated at the threshold, taking in the simple but orderly interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel holding medical texts alongside practical guides to farming and animal husbandry. A desk beneath the window was covered with neat stacks of journals and correspondence. The furnishings were sparse, but well maintained. A rocking chair with a patchwork cushion, a dining table with 4 mismatched chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner, screened by a colorful quilt hung from the ceiling. "It's not much," Eliza said, gesturing them toward the table where she'd laid out a simple breakfast of bread, preserves, and fresh milk from her single cow. "But it's mine, free and clear." As the family settled themselves at the table, Eliza noted how the girls waited for their mother to begin eating before they touched their own food. Even in desperation, Rebecca had maintained certain standards, a small rebellion against their circumstances. "I need to understand what we're facing," Eliza said once they'd eaten enough to take the edge off their hunger. "How many men is Hargrove likely to send, and how soon might they reach this area?" Rebecca set down her spoon, her hands trembling slightly. "Edward doesn't leave things to chance. He'll have hired at least 4 men, professionals, not local, toughs. They'll be well armed and well paid." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "As for timing, if they tracked us to Silverthorne, they could be in this area within 2 days." "Silverthorne is only 20 miles south," Eliza noted, her mind calculating distances and travel times. "If they're good trackers, it could be sooner." Little Sophia looked up from her bread, her eyes wide. "Are the bad men coming here, Mama?" Rebecca smoothed her daughter's hair with a gentle hand. "I don't know, sweetheart, but Miss Montgomery is helping us stay safe." Eliza moved to her desk and unfolded a map of the county, weighing the corners with small stones. "There are decisions to be made," she said, motioning Rebecca to join her. "Staying here isn't an option. This would be the first isolated property they'd check once they reach the area. But I have contacts who might help." Charlotte had abandoned her breakfast to examine Eliza's bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines of medical texts with obvious curiosity. "You're a doctor?" she asked. "A nurse," Eliza corrected, "though I've done a doctor's work when necessary." "Mother says women aren't allowed to be proper doctors," Emma chimed in. "She says it's not considered ladylike." Eliza allowed herself a small smile. "Many things worth doing aren't considered ladylike. Fortunately, the people who need medical care rarely concern themselves with such distinctions when they're bleeding or bringing new life into the world." Rebecca joined, Eliza at the map, her expression troubled. "I can't ask you to risk everything for us. You've already done more than most would." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Eliza replied, tracing a route with her finger. "There's a settlement about 30 miles north called Cottonwood Springs. The doctor there is a friend, one of the few who didn't turn away when I chose to honor my promise to Dr. Richardson. Sarah Blackwood is her name, and she runs a clinic that serves several mining communities in the area." "A female doctor?" Charlotte asked, her interest piqued. Eliza nodded. "One of the first women to graduate from medical college in Philadelphia. She came west because no Eastern hospital would hire her despite her excellent qualifications." She turned back to Rebecca. "Sarah might be willing to shelter you while we determine a more permanent solution." "Why would she take such a risk for strangers?" Rebecca asked, the caution of recent betrayals evident in her voice. "Because 15 years ago I helped her establish that clinic when no one else would lend her money or sell her property," Eliza explained. "And because Sarah Blackwood understands what it means to rebuild a life after everything familiar has been stripped away." The plan began to take shape between them. Eliza would escort the Wellingtons to Cottonwood Springs, traveling by night and keeping to less used trails to avoid detection. Once there, Sarah could provide temporary sanctuary while they secured more permanent arrangements, perhaps passage further west to Oregon or California, where Hargrove's influence would be significantly diminished. As Rebecca returned to help her daughters prepare for the journey, Eliza took stock of their supplies. The family would need warmer clothing, food that could be eaten cold on the trail, and at least one weapon they could use if confronted. Most of these items Eliza could provide from her own stores, the carefully maintained resources of someone who lived far from convenient markets. But there was one crucial element they lacked: transportation. Eliza's single horse couldn't carry all 5 of them, and traveling on foot would make them vulnerable and slow. She would need additional horses or a wagon, neither of which she possessed. As she contemplated this problem, a memory surfaced from several years earlier. Joshua Jenkins, a rancher whose property lay about 5 miles east, had owed her a considerable debt since she'd saved his wife and newborn son during a difficult breech birth. Jenkins had offered payment at the time, but Eliza had refused, following her practice of treating all patients regardless of their ability to pay. Instead, Jenkins had insisted she accept his promise of future assistance should she ever need it. That future had arrived. Jenkins kept several good horses and at least 2 serviceable wagons. If he honored his promise, they might have transportation by nightfall, but leaving the Wellingtons alone while she traveled to Jenkins' ranch presented its own risks. If Hargrove's men arrived early, the family would be defenseless in her absence. Yet delaying their departure only increased the danger. Eliza made her decision. She would ride to Jenkins' ranch immediately, leaving the family with clear instructions on hiding places and emergency signals. With luck, she could return before midday with the transportation they needed to leave under cover of darkness. When she explained her plan to Rebecca, the other woman's face tightened with anxiety, but She nodded in understanding. "We'll be careful," she promised. "The girls and I will stay hidden in the root cellar you showed us. No one will know we're here." Eliza retrieved her medical bag, selecting several items that might prove useful on their journey. As she worked, she became aware of Charlotte watching her with intense interest. "Were you always a nurse?" the girl asked, her intelligent eyes taking in Eliza's methodical preparations. "Since I was 18, Eliza replied, counting bandage rolls. "I trained at Bellevue Hospital in New York before moving west with my husband." "The husband you left to keep your promise." Eliza's hands stilled. The directness of the question was startling, though she supposed she shouldn't be surprised. Children often perceived more than adults gave them credit for. "Yes," she answered simply. "Thomas didn't understand why I needed to help people who couldn't pay for care. He wanted a different kind of life, one with social standing and financial security." "Do you regret it?" Charlotte pressed, her young face serious. "Leaving him, I mean." The question cut to the heart of Eliza's 15 years of solitude. Did she regret honoring her promise to Dr. Richardson? There had been countless nights when the answer had been yes, nights when the isolation pressed in like a physical weight, when memories of what she had sacrificed kept her awake until dawn. But those moments had always been balanced by others: the grateful eyes of a mother whose child she had saved, the relief on a miner's face when fever broke, the quiet dignity restored to people who had been treated as less than human by other medical practitioners. "I regret the pain my choice caused," Eliza said finally. "I regret that Thomas and I couldn't find a way forward together, but I don't regret the lives I've been able to help because of that choice." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "Mother says we had to leave Mr. Hargrove because sometimes being safe is more important than having nice things or a big house. She says we're doing what's right, even though it's hard." The parallel wasn't lost on Eliza. Both she and Rebecca had left comfortable lives because of moral imperatives that others couldn't understand. The difference was that Rebecca had 3 children depending on her courage, while Eliza had faced her exile alone. "Your mother is very brave," Eliza said, closing her medical bag, "and so are you, looking after your sisters the way you do." A hint of pride flickered across Charlotte's solemn face. "Father always said the eldest has responsibilities. Before he died, he made me promise to help Mother protect Emma and Sophia." Her small chin lifted. "I haven't forgotten." Another promise that shaped a life, Eliza thought. Even children weren't exempt from such defining moments. With her preparations complete, Eliza gathered the family for final instructions before her departure. "Stay in the root cellar unless you hear my signal. 3 short whistles followed by 1 long one. If anyone else approaches, remain absolutely silent. There's food, water and blankets enough for the day." Rebecca clasped Eliza's hand with surprising strength. "Be careful," she said quietly. "We've brought enough danger to your door already." "Danger has a way of finding me regardless," Eliza replied with a wry smile. "It's been the pattern of my life since I left Boston." As she mounted her horse and headed east toward Jenkins' ranch, Eliza tried to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Leaving the Wellingtons alone felt wrong, but staying together without transportation was an even greater risk. If Jenkins honored his promise, they would have a fighting chance to reach Cottonwood Springs before Hargrove's men caught their trail. The ride to Jenkins' property took just under an hour, the late October landscape a study in browns and fading, greens beneath a sky that promised snow within days. Eliza rehearsed her request as she rode, considering how much to reveal about the Wellington situation. Joshua Jenkins was a good man in most respects, but he was also a businessman with connections throughout the county. If word reached the wrong ears that he had helped a fugitive family, his own standing might suffer. As she approached the sprawling ranch house, Eliza was relieved to see Jenkins himself in the corral, working with a young horse. He was a tall, heavy-set man with a prosperous look about him, someone whose hard work had yielded tangible rewards. When he spotted Eliza, genuine pleasure spread across his weathered face. "Miss Montgomery," he called, handing the horse's lead to a nearby ranch hand. "This is an unexpected honor. Martha will be delighted to see you." "I'm afraid this isn't a social call, Mr. Jenkins," Eliza said, dismounting. "I've come to ask for your help, the help you once offered when I delivered your son." Jenkins' expression grew serious. "Of course, whatever you need." In the privacy of his study, Eliza explained that she needed to transport a family in danger to Cottonwood Springs as quickly and discreetly as possible. She deliberately omitted details about Hargrove, saying only that the family faced serious harm if they remained in the area. "I need a wagon that can handle mountain trails and enough horses to make the journey in a single night," she concluded. "I know it's a significant request, but—" Jenkins held up a hand to stop her. "Miss Montgomery, when you saved Martha and little Thomas, I told you I owed you a debt no money could repay. I meant it then, and I mean it now." He walked to the window, considering. "I have a light wagon with good suspension that can handle rough terrain, and I can spare 2 of my best trail horses." Relief washed over Eliza. "Thank you. I'll return them as soon as possible." "There's no rush," Jenkins assured her. "But there is one condition." When Eliza tensed, he continued quickly, "I'm sending my foreman, Michael Reeves, with you as far as Cottonwood Springs. The mountain passes can be treacherous this time of year, and Reeves knows them better than anyone. He's discreet and reliable. I'd trust him with my life." Eliza's first instinct was to refuse. Another person involved meant another potential security risk, another variable she couldn't control. But Jenkins was right about the mountain trails. A wrong turn or unexpected obstacle could strand them in the open, vulnerable to both the elements. "And pursuit? Very well," she agreed reluctantly. "But Mr. Reeves must understand the sensitive nature of this journey. The fewer questions asked, the better." Jenkins nodded solemnly. "He'll follow your lead without question. Reeves has helped people in difficult situations before." There was something in his tone that suggested a deeper history, but Eliza didn't press for details. If Jenkins trusted the man, that would have to be enough. Within the hour, the wagon was prepared. Loaded with supplies, Jenkins insisted on contributing. Extra blankets, preserved food, coffee, and ammunition for the rifle he included without comment. Michael Reeves proved to be a lean, weathered man, of around 50, with the quiet competence of someone accustomed to solving practical problems. He asked no questions about their destination or purpose, simply nodded when introduced and began checking the wagon's wheels and harness with methodical attention. As Eliza prepared to depart, Martha Jenkins emerged from the house, their 7-year-old son Thomas in tow. The boy had grown into a sturdy child with his father's build and his mother's gentle eyes. He carried a small package wrapped in oilcloth, which he presented to Eliza with shy pride. "Mama said you might need these," he said. "I helped wrap them." Inside the package, Eliza found several small bottles of medicine, laudanum, quinine, and a tincture of willow bark, along with clean bandages and surgical thread. The supplies were valuable additions to her own medical stores, especially if their journey encountered complications. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, touched by the family's thoughtfulness. "These will be very useful." Martha stepped forward, her once frail frame now robust with recovered health. "It's the least we can do," she said warmly. "You gave us our son and my life. We've never forgotten." As they prepared to leave, Jenkins drew Eliza aside for a final word. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "There were men asking questions in town yesterday. Easterners with city clothes and hard eyes. They were offering money for information about a woman and 3 girls traveling alone. Eliza's blood ran cold. Hargrove's men were already here. Did anyone speak to them? "Most folks around here mind their own business," Jenkins replied. "But money talks, especially when times are hard. I'd move quickly if I were you." With renewed urgency, Eliza thanked the Jenkins family and set off with Reeves toward her cabin. The information changed everything. If Hargrove's men were already in the area, they might have learned about her isolated property from locals, who had seen the Wellingtons on the road. They needed to be gone before nightfall, using darkness to cover their initial departure, but not waiting so long that they risked being discovered. As they traveled, Eliza studied Michael Reeves with cautious assessment. The man handled the wagon with skill, navigating the uneven terrain without unnecessary jolts. He spoke little, but his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings with professional awareness. There was military training in his bearing, Eliza suspected, though he wore no insignia or uniform that might confirm it. "Mr. Jenkins said you've helped people in difficult situations before," she ventured, testing the waters of his discretion. Reeves kept his eyes on the trail. "Some folks deserve a second chance," he said simply. "Not everyone gets one." The cryptic response told Eliza what she needed to know. This was a man who understood that justice and law weren't always the same thing, who had likely seen enough of both to develop his own moral compass. For the moment, that would have to suffice. They reached Eliza's property shortly after noon, to find everything apparently undisturbed. Eliza gave her signal, 3 short whistles followed by 1 long one, and waited anxiously for a response. After what seemed an eternity, the root cellar door opened slightly, and Rebecca's face appeared, tense with fear, until she recognized Eliza. "Thank God," she breathed, emerging with her daughters. "We heard horses about an hour ago." They passed nearby but didn't approach the cabin. Eliza exchanged an alarmed glance with Reeves. "Scouts," he said quietly. "They're establishing a perimeter before moving in. We need to go now." Within minutes, the Wellington family was loaded into the wagon, their few possessions and Eliza's essential supplies secured beneath a canvas tarp. Reeves had repacked the supplies to create a hidden compartment where the girls could conceal themselves if necessary, while Rebecca and Eliza would pose as sisters traveling to visit family if challenged. As they prepared to depart, Eliza took a final look at the cabin that had been her home for the past decade. The simple structure had sheltered her through countless storms, both literal and figurative. It had been her refuge and her prison, the physical manifestation of both her independence and her isolation. Leaving it felt momentous, as if she were shedding a skin that had grown too familiar. "Will you come back?" Charlotte asked, noticing Eliza's lingering gaze. "I don't know," Eliza admitted. "Sometimes the path forward doesn't allow for returning to where you've been." As they set off toward the north, following logging trails that would keep them away from the main roads, Eliza felt a strange lightness despite the danger ahead. For 15 years, she had carried Dr. Richardson's dying request as both a mission and a burden. But helping the Wellingtons felt different somehow, not an obligation born from a deathbed promise, but a choice made freely, a recognition that her skills and strength were meant to serve a purpose greater than mere survival. Whatever awaited them in Cottonwood Springs, whatever dangers Hargrove's men presented, Eliza Montgomery was no longer simply fulfilling an old vow. She was writing a new chapter in a story she had thought was already finished. A story about second chances, unexpected connections, and the courage to begin again when everything familiar had been left behind. The wagon rattled over exposed tree roots as they followed a seldom-used logging trail through stands of aspen and pine. Octobers. Early darkness was their ally, cloaking their movement as they navigated increasingly difficult terrain. Eliza sat beside Reeves on the driver's bench, her medical bag secure between her feet, while Rebecca and her daughters huddled beneath blankets in the wagon bed, speaking in whispers when they spoke at all. Reeves handled the team with quiet confidence, anticipating obstacles before they became problems. His eyes constantly scanned the surrounding forest, alert for any sign of pursuit or ambush. The man's competence was reassuring, but also concerning. He moved with the practiced caution of someone who had lived through genuine danger, not merely anticipated it. "You've done this before," Eliza observed quietly, keeping her voice low. "Enough that the Wellingtons couldn't hear. Helped people escape something worse than poverty." Reeves adjusted the reins slightly before answering. "During the war, I served with the Union Army. Afterward, I stayed in the South for a time, helping freedmen reach safety when local authorities looked the other way during night raids." His weathered face remained impassive, but something in his tone suggested memories he preferred not to revisit. "Some men with power believe they own other people. They don't surrender that belief easily." Eliza nodded, understanding the parallel to Hargrove's pursuit of his property. A wife and daughters he considered his by right rather than through mutual consent. "How did you come to work for Jenkins?" "Came west for the same reason most do, to start fresh where people ask fewer questions about your past." He guided the horses around a fallen log with practiced ease. Jenkins needed someone who could handle trouble without creating more of it. "It's been a good arrangement for both of us." Their conversation lapsed into silence as the trail narrowed, requiring Reeves' full attention to navigate. Eliza used the quiet to assess their situation with the clinical detachment she'd developed through years of medical emergencies. They had traveled roughly 10 miles since leaving her cabin, maintaining a decent pace despite the challenging terrain. If they continued without incident, they might reach Cottonwood Springs by dawn, assuming the weather held and they encountered no unexpected obstacles. But experience had taught Eliza that journeys rarely proceeded according to plan, especially when lives hung in the balance. She mentally inventoried their resources: Reeves' rifle and obvious expertise, her own medical knowledge, and the revolver now secured in her coat pocket, the supplies Jenkins had provided, and perhaps most importantly, the determination of a mother protecting her children. Against these assets stood Hargrove's hired men, professionals with superior numbers, equipment, and local information purchased from willing informants. The logical assessment wasn't encouraging, but Eliza had long ago learned that survival often depended more on adaptability than advantage. They would simply have to remain vigilant and respond to threats as they emerged. As twilight deepened into true night, the temperature dropped sharply. Eliza passed back additional blankets from their supplies, making sure the girls were adequately protected against the mountain cold. Little Sophia had fallen asleep despite the wagon's constant movement. Her small body curled against her mother's side like a hibernating animal. Emma dozed fitfully, startling at louder sounds before settling again. Only Charlotte remained fully awake, her eyes reflecting the occasional moonlight that penetrated the forest canopy. "How much farther?" the girl asked, her voice barely audible above the creak of wagon wheels. "Many hours yet," Eliza replied honestly. "Try to rest if you can. We'll need your help when we reach Cottonwood Springs." Charlotte nodded solemnly, accepting the adult responsibility without complaint. The girl's resilience was remarkable, though Eliza knew from professional experience that such strength often masked deeper wounds. Children forced to grow up too quickly paid prices invisible to casual observers, prices that sometimes came due years later in ways no one anticipated. The trail began to climb more steeply as they approached the first of several mountain passes that separated Eliza's valley from Cottonwood Springs. Reeves slowed the horses to a careful walk, mindful of loose stones that could cause a dangerous stumble in the darkness. The wagon creaked ominously as it tilted on the uneven ground, forcing its occupants to brace themselves against sudden shifts. "We should stop briefly at the summit," Reeves suggested. "Let the horses rest before the descent. There's a lookout point that would give us a view of the valley we've left. Might show if anyone's following our trail." Eliza agreed, though. The delay made her uneasy. Every minute spent stationary was another opportunity for Hargrove's men to close the distance between them, but pushing the horses too hard would leave them vulnerable if they needed a quick escape later. As they neared the summit, the forest thinned, replaced by scrubby bushes and exposed rock that offered little concealment. The trail widened into a small plateau that served as both a natural viewpoint and a resting place for travelers. Reeves guided the wagon to a position that allowed them to see the valley below, while remaining partially shielded from observation. "Stay in the wagon," he instructed Rebecca and the girls. "Keep the blankets over you. The less movement visible from below, the better." While Reeves attended to the horses, Eliza climbed to the highest point of the plateau, using a fallen tree trunk as a makeshift seat as she studied the valley they had left. From this elevation, her cabin was merely a dark speck against the landscape, barely visible in the moonlight. But what drew her attention were the pinpricks of light moving along the main road. At least 3 lanterns carried by riders moving with purpose rather than casual travel. "Hargrove's men," Reeves confirmed, joining her at the viewpoint. "Moving faster than I'd hoped." Eliza felt ice form in her stomach. "How long before they reach my cabin?" "Hour, maybe less." He studied the distant lights with narrowed eyes. "They'll find it empty, search the surroundings, then start questioning whether you helped the family escape. Which means they'll start checking likely routes and destinations," Eliza concluded grimly. "How many logging trails lead north from my property?" 3 main ones," Reeves replied. "This one's the least used, but also the most difficult. They'll probably check the others first, but eventually they'll try this route too." The implications were clear. Their head start was rapidly diminishing, and their chosen path, while less obvious, was slow enough that determined pursuers could overtake them before they reached Cottonwood Springs. They needed a strategy beyond simply pressing forward and hoping for the best. Reeves seemed to follow her thoughts. "There's an old mining camp about 5 miles ahead. Been abandoned for years, but some of the structures are still standing. Might be a place to rest the horses properly and consider our options. Or a place to be trapped if they catch up to us," Eliza pointed out. "True enough," Reeves acknowledged, "but it also offers better defensive positions than being caught on the open trail. And there's an old mine shaft that connects to a tunnel system, might provide an alternative escape route if needed." The suggestion held merit, though Eliza disliked the idea of being cornered in an abandoned camp. Still, exhausted horses would slow them more certainly than a strategic pause to rest and regroup. "We'll stop briefly at the mining camp," she decided, "but we should be prepared to leave at a moment's notice." As they returned to the wagon, Eliza explained the situation to Rebecca, who received the news with remarkable composure. "We've come too far to be caught now," she said, her voice steady despite the fear visible in her eyes. "Whatever plan you think gives us the best chance, we'll follow it." They resumed their journey with renewed urgency, descending the northern slope of the pass with as much speed as safety allowed. The trail here was treacherous, narrow switchbacks with steep drop-offs that required Reeves's constant attention to navigate. Eliza found herself holding her breath during particularly sharp turns, aware that a single misstep by the horses could send the wagon plummeting into the darkness below. The abandoned mining camp appeared suddenly around a bend, a collection of weathered wooden structures clinging to the mountainside like prehistoric nests. Most of the buildings had collapsed under the weight of heavy mountain snows, but a few remained upright, including a larger structure that might have been a communal dining hall or supply depot. Reeves guided the wagon to a position between two of the sturdier buildings, creating a sheltered area where they could rest without being immediately visible from the trail. "I'll check the structures," he said, reaching for his rifle. "Make sure we're alone." While he conducted his inspection, Eliza helped the Wellingtons from the wagon. The girls were stiff from hours of confinement, their movements jerky as circulation returned to cramped limbs. Even Rebecca winced as she stood, though she quickly masked her discomfort when her daughters looked to her for reassurance. "Is this where Dr. Blackwood lives?" Emma asked, looking around at the dilapidated camp with obvious disappointment. "No, sweetheart," Rebecca answered before Eliza could respond. "This is just a stopping place on our journey. Dr. Blackwood's town is much nicer than this." Reeves returned from his reconnaissance with cautiously positive news. "Most structures are too unstable to use, but the old assay office is sound enough. It's got a stone foundation and walls on 3 sides, with the 4th collapsed in a way that actually provides good cover while still allowing access." He led them to a building set slightly apart from the others, its stone base supporting partial wooden walls, and a sagging roof that nonetheless kept out the worst of the elements. Inside, the space was surprisingly clean, with little of the debris or animal evidence Eliza had expected. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney intact enough to safely vent smoke. "We could risk a small fire," Reeves suggested. "These mountains get deadly cold at night, and there's enough cloud cover now that the smoke wouldn't be visible from a distance." Eliza weighed the risk against the very real danger of hypothermia, especially for the children. "A small fire," she agreed. "Just enough to warm some food and take the edge off the cold." While Reeves gathered fuel, Eliza organized their supplies, setting out preserved food and the coffee that Jenkins had included in their provisions. The simple act of creating order helped settle her thoughts, providing a framework for addressing their larger concerns. Charlotte assisted without being asked, arranging blankets near where the fire would be and helping her sisters get comfortable. The girl moved with the efficient purpose of someone accustomed to taking on adult responsibilities, anticipating needs before they were expressed. "You're very capable," Eliza observed, handing her a packet of dried apples to distribute. "Your father would be proud of how you're looking after your family." Something flickered across Charlotte's face, grief briefly visible before being tucked away behind practicality. "Father always said that hard times show what people are made of. He said some break while others become stronger." "And which are you becoming?" Eliza asked gently. Charlotte considered the question with serious deliberation. "I don't know yet," she admitted finally. "Sometimes I feel very strong, and other times I'm scared of everything." "That's the secret most adults won't tell you," Eliza confided. "The strongest people are often the most afraid. They just keep going despite their fear, not in the absence of it." Reeves returned with an armload of wood and quickly built a small, efficient fire in the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across the stone walls, creating an almost comfortable atmosphere despite their precarious circumstances. As warmth slowly filled the space, the tight knots of tension in shoulders and faces began to loosen, allowing for the first real conversation since they'd left Eliza's cabin. While the others ate and recovered their strength, Reeves drew Eliza aside to discuss their situation. "We should leave before dawn," he said quietly. "Follow the old miner's trail, rather than the logging road. It's rougher terrain, but less likely to be checked by pursuers." "How much will that delay our arrival in Cottonwood Springs?" Eliza asked. "Half a day, maybe more," Reeves admitted, "but better late than captured." Eliza nodded in agreement. What about the mine shaft you mentioned? Could it provide an alternative route if we're cornered? Possibly, Reeves said, though his expression suggested limited confidence. The tunnels were mapped in the company records, but those maps are 20 years old. Cave-ins, flooding, support failures. There's no way to know what condition they're in now. But they could be a last resort, Eliza pressed. A desperate one, Reeves confirmed. The main shaft opens about a quarter-mile from here. It eventually connects to another exit on the northern side of the mountain, but navigating the tunnels without proper equipment or current maps would be extremely dangerous. Eliza filed the information away, hoping they wouldn't need to test such a perilous escape route. We should establish watches through the night, she suggested, 2-hour shifts alternating between us. Before Reeves could respond, a sound from outside froze them both, the distant but unmistakable whinny of a horse, followed by the muffled voice of a man attempting to quiet the animal. Their time had run out sooner than anticipated. Hargrove's men had somehow gained ground more quickly than expected, perhaps by taking a direct route rather than following their actual trail. Reeves immediately extinguished the fire, plunging the room into darkness, relieved only by faint moonlight filtering through gaps in the roof. "Wake the others," he whispered urgently. "No noise, no light. We need to move toward the mine shaft now." Eliza roused Rebecca and the girls, pressing fingers to lips to indicate silence. Little Sophia, still half asleep, began to question the sudden activity, but Charlotte quickly covered her sister's mouth with a gentle hand, understanding the need for absolute quiet. Gathering only essential supplies, Eliza's medical bag, Reeves' rifle and ammunition, a lantern, matches, and as much food as they could carry, they slipped out the back of the building where the collapsed wall created a natural screen from the direction of approaching voices. Reeves led them in a crouching run toward the mine entrance, using the ruined buildings as cover whenever possible. The mine shaft loomed before them, like the entrance to an underworld, a black rectangle framed by partially collapsed timber supports, with rusted rail tracks disappearing into absolute darkness. The air emerging from the opening was damp and cool, carrying the metallic scent of mineral deposits and the earthier smell of decay. "Stay close, follow exactly in my footsteps and make no sound," Reeves instructed as he lit the lantern, adjusting the wick to provide minimum illumination. The main passage should be stable enough, but side tunnels could be deadly. They entered the mine in single file, Reeves leading with the lantern, followed by Rebecca with Sophia in her arms, then Emma, Charlotte, and Eliza bringing up the rear with her hand on the revolver in her pocket. The darkness swallowed them immediately, reducing their world to the small circle of wavering light that revealed rotting support beams, abandoned tools, and the occasional evidence of hasty departure when the mine had finally been declared unprofitable. The main shaft extended straight into the mountain for nearly 100 yards before branching into 3 separate tunnels. Reeves paused at the junction, studying barely visible markings on the rock wall. "Left tunnel," he decided quietly. "It's marked as connecting to the northern exit." As they turned into the left passage, the sound of voices echoed from the mine entrance. Hargrove's men had discovered their escape route and were following. Rebecca clutched Sophia tighter, while Emma pressed herself against her mother's side, her eyes wide with fear, visible even in the dim light. "How far to the exit?" Eliza whispered to Reeves. "Half a mile, maybe more," he replied grimly. "And they'll gain on us. They can move faster with better light." The implications were clear. They couldn't outrun their pursuers in the confined space of the tunnel. They would be caught before reaching safety, unless something changed. The equation. Eliza made a swift decision. "Take them ahead," she told Reeves. "I'll create a diversion, then catch up." "What kind of diversion?" Rebecca asked, her voice tight with concern. Instead of answering directly, Eliza reached into her medical bag and removed several small bottles. "Chemicals," she explained briefly. Combined correctly, they create reactions useful in medicine. Combined differently. Understanding dawned in Reeves's eyes. You're going to collapse the tunnel. Just enough to slow them down, Eliza clarified. Not enough to trap us inside permanently. It was a dangerous gamble. Too small a reaction would barely delay their pursuers. Too large might bring down sections of the mine they needed for their own escape. But the alternative was being caught in the tunnels with nowhere to run and 3 children to protect. Be careful, Reeves warned. These old mines are unstable at the best of times. Eliza nodded, already measuring precise amounts from her bottles into a small metal container from her medical kit. Go ahead about 200 yards, then wait. I'll join you within 10 minutes. As the others continued down the tunnel, Eliza worked quickly, combining chemicals that would create a controlled but significant reaction when activated. Dr. Richardson had taught her these formulations for medical purposes, cauterizing wounds, sterilizing instruments, generating heat in emergency situations, but had also warned about their potential danger if mishandled. Today, that danger would serve a different kind of healing. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the bobbing light of lanterns much brighter than the one Reeves carried. Eliza positioned her improvised device at a point where the tunnel narrowed, and the ceiling showed signs of previous instability. She created a simple fuse, using twisted paper soaked in alcohol, giving herself just enough time to reach a safe distance before ignition. With a final check of her work, Eliza lit the fuse and retreated down the tunnel at a carefully controlled run, counting seconds in her head. She had almost reached the distance she'd judged safe when the explosion ripped through the confined space with far more force than she'd anticipated. The concussion threw her forward onto the rough ground as dust and debris rained from the ceiling. For several terrifying seconds, it seemed the entire mine might collapse around her. When the immediate danger passed, Eliza picked herself up carefully, assessing for injuries with professional detachment despite her racing heart. A few cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. More concerning was the dust-filled air that made breathing difficult and the near-total darkness. Her lantern had shattered in the fall. Behind her, the tunnel was partially blocked by fallen rock and splintered support timbers, passable with difficulty, but sufficient to significantly delay pursuit. Ahead, she could just make out the faint glow of Reeves's lantern where the others waited. Eliza moved toward that light, feeling her way along the wall when necessary, grateful that the explosion had achieved its purpose without trapping them completely. She found the Wellingtons and Reeves huddled in an alcove where the tunnel widened slightly, their faces pale with fear and streaked with dust. Charlotte immediately moved to help her, supporting Eliza's arm as she joined the group. "Are you hurt?" the girl asked with the serious concern of someone much older. "Just shaken," Eliza assured her, though her ears still rang from the explosion and her lungs burned from dust inhalation. "The tunnel is partially collapsed. It will slow them down but not stop them entirely. We need to keep moving." Reeves nodded grimly. "That was a bigger blast than I expected. Might have destabilized other sections of the mine. We should move quickly but carefully. Test the ground before putting full weight on it." They continued their journey through the increasingly treacherous tunnel, acutely aware of the danger, both behind and potentially ahead. The explosion had disturbed the delicate balance of the abandoned mine, sending vibrations through ancient support structures never designed to last decades without maintenance. Twice they were forced to navigate around sections where the ceiling had partially collapsed, carefully picking their way through narrow gaps where a wrong step could trigger further cave-ins. Little Sophia had stopped crying, moving beyond fear, into a kind of numb compliance that worried Eliza more than tears would have. The child clung to her mother with desperate strength, her face buried against Rebecca's neck, as if by not seeing danger she could make it cease to exist. Emma walked in silence, her hand gripping Charlotte's with white-knuckled intensity, while Charlotte maintained the stoic determination that had become her defining characteristic. After what seemed an eternity of cautious progress, Reeves' lantern illuminated a change in the tunnel ahead, a gradual upward slope, and the distinctive scent of outside air seeping through the stale mine atmosphere. "We're approaching the northern exit," he announced quietly. "Another 100 yards at most." The news should have brought relief, but Eliza felt her apprehension increase. The exit would lead them back into open territory where Hargrove's remaining men might be waiting. If the pursuers in the mine had communicated with others outside, the Wellingtons could be walking from one trap into another. She shared her concern with Reeves, who nodded in grim agreement. "I'll go ahead and check the situation before we all emerge," he decided. "If there's danger, I'll draw them away from the exit while you take the family in another direction." "That's too dangerous," Eliza protested. "You'd be sacrificing yourself." Reeves checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Better one man than 2 women and 3 children," he said simply. Jenkins would expect no less. Before Eliza could argue further, the faint but unmistakable sound of movement echoed from the tunnel behind them. Their pursuers had navigated the collapsed section more quickly than anticipated. There was no time left for debate or alternative plans. "Go," Eliza urged the others. "Get to the exit. I'll delay them here." Rebecca looked at her with sudden understanding and fear. "You can't stay behind. They'll kill you." "I don't intend to die," Eliza replied with more confidence than she felt. "But I need to ensure they can't follow you immediately. Go with Reeves. Get the girls to safety." For a moment, Rebecca seemed ready to argue, but maternal instinct won over personal concern. She gave Eliza's hand a quick, fierce squeeze, then hurried her daughters forward toward the exit where Reeves waited with the lantern. Alone in the semi-darkness, Eliza positioned herself at a bend in the tunnel that would conceal her from immediate view while allowing her to monitor the approaching pursuit. She removed her revolver from her pocket, checking that all 6 chambers were loaded. Dr. Richardson had insisted she learn to shoot properly when she began her traveling practice, arguing that medical skills were useless if she couldn't survive to apply them. Today, those lessons might save not just her life, but the lives of 4 others who depended on her courage. The approaching light grew stronger, accompanied by the sound of men speaking in low, urgent tones. Eliza pressed herself against the rough stone wall, controlling her breathing as she had taught patients suffering from anxiety. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations that kept the mind clear and the hands steady. As the first pursuer rounded the bend, Eliza stepped forward, revolver aimed with unwavering precision. "That's far enough," she said, her voice calm despite the frantic pounding of her heart. "The next man who moves gets a bullet." The lantern light illuminated 3 men, professional hunters by their weathered appearance and well-maintained weapons. Their leader, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and city clothes beneath his duster, studied Eliza with cold calculation rather than surprise or fear. The insignia on his jacket pocket marked him as Pinkerton, or at least someone wanting to be perceived as such. "Miss Montgomery, I presume," he said, his Boston accent confirming Eliza's suspicions about his employer. "I'm Richard Vaughan, representing Mr. Edward Hargrove's interests. We have no quarrel with you personally, but the family you're sheltering must return to Boston immediately. Mrs. Wellington and her daughters are under my protection," Eliza replied steadily, the revolver unwavering in her hand. Mr. Hargrove's interests stopped being relevant the moment he raised his hand against them. Vaughan sighed as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. Domestic matters are private affairs, Miss Montgomery. The law grants a husband certain rights regarding his family's whereabouts and behavior. You're interfering in a legal matter, which could result in serious consequences for yourself. Despite her precarious position, Eliza felt a surge of righteous anger. I've spent 15 years treating women whose domestic matters left them with broken bones and shattered spirits. Don't lecture me about legal rights when we both know what Hargrove really wants. The Pinkerton agent's expression hardened. What Mr. Hargrove wants is irrelevant to our assignment. We're contracted to return his wife and daughters to Boston, and we intend to fulfill that contract. He gestured to the tunnel behind Eliza. You're outnumbered and cornered. Your associates can't have gone far in these unstable tunnels. Be reasonable and avoid unnecessary violence. Eliza's mind raced, calculating options and probabilities with the same clinical precision she applied to medical diagnoses. 3. Armed men against her single revolver presented poor odds in a direct confrontation. She needed to change the dynamics of the encounter before Vaughan's patience expired. You're right about one thing, she said, maintaining eye contact with Vaughan while addressing all three men. Violence would be unnecessary, especially since this situation has become considerably more complicated than your employer disclosed. Something in her tone caught Vaughan's attention. Explain. Mr. Hargrove hired you to retrieve his family discreetly, I imagine, Eliza continued. A simple domestic matter, as you put it. But did he mention that Mrs. Wellington is carrying evidence of his financial crimes? Evidence that would interest not just the Boston police, but federal authorities. It was a calculated bluff, but one based on Rebecca's earlier comments about Hargrove's obsessive need to control her activities and correspondence. Men like Hargrove rarely limited their corruption to a single aspect of their lives. If he abused his family, he likely abused his power in other ways as well. The flicker of uncertainty in Vaughan's eyes confirmed Eliza's suspicion that Hargrove had been less than forthcoming with his hired men. Professional agents like these operated within certain boundaries, and being drawn unwittingly into criminal conspiracy fell well outside those lines. What kind of evidence? Vaughan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Financial records proving embezzlement from his own bank, Eliza improvised, drawing on vague recollections of newspaper articles about banking scandals. Documents showing systematic theft from accounts belonging to widows and orphans, the most vulnerable clients who wouldn't notice small, regular withdrawals. The two men flanking Vaughan exchanged glances, their professional detachment showing cracks of concern. Retrieving a runaway wife was one thing, becoming accessories to financial crimes that targeted society's most sympathetic victims was quite another. Mrs. Wellington discovered these discrepancies while helping organize her husband's papers, Eliza continued, pressing her advantage. When she confronted him, his response was violence rather than explanation. That's why she fled, not just to escape abuse, but to ensure justice for the people he's been systematically robbing. Vaughan studied her with narrowed eyes, likely assessing whether she was bluffing. If such evidence exists, why hasn't Mrs. Wellington taken it to the authorities? Because she needed to get her daughters to safety first, Eliza replied smoothly. A woman in her position knows how easily a powerful man can discredit her testimony without supporting documentation. But rest assured that documentation is now in the hands of people who will use it appropriately if anything happens to the Wellington family. It was a masterful improvisation, and Eliza could see it landing effectively. The agents were visibly recalculating their position, weighing the substantial risk that they were being manipulated into something far more serious than a domestic retrieval. That's quite a story, Miss Montgomery, Vaughan said finally. Convenient but lacking verification. Verification is coming, Eliza assured him with more confidence than she felt. Federal marshals have been notified of Hargrove's activities. They're already en route to Cottonwood Springs to take official statements from Mrs. Wellington and secure the evidence. The mention of federal involvement introduced a new level of risk for men whose profession often operated in legal grey areas. Even if they doubted Eliza's claims, the potential consequences of interfering with a federal investigation were severe enough to warrant caution. Vaughan conferred briefly with his companions in hushed tones before turning back to Eliza. "We'll need to verify these claims independently before proceeding further. Our contract with Mr. Hargrove doesn't include obstruction of justice or interference with federal investigations. It was the opening Eliza needed. A wise decision, Mr. Vaughan. I suggest you return to town and wire your superiors for guidance. By the time you receive a response, Mrs. Wellington will be safely in federal custody, and your agency can avoid any appearance of complicity in Hargrove's schemes." For several tense moments, the outcome hung in the balance as Vaughan weighed his options. Then, with the pragmatism of a professional who recognized when a situation had fundamentally changed, he nodded curtly. "We'll withdraw temporarily to assess this new information," he conceded. "But understand this, Miss Montgomery. If your claims prove false, our return will be considerably less cordial." "I would expect nothing less," Eliza replied, maintaining her aim until the men retreated down the tunnel, their lantern light gradually diminishing until darkness reclaimed the passage. Only when she was certain they were truly withdrawing did Eliza allow herself to exhale fully, her hands trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. The bluff had worked, buying precious time, but it wouldn't hold them off indefinitely. Once Vaughan communicated with Hargrove or his agency, they would quickly discover that no federal marshals were involved. Eliza hurried toward the tunnel exit, praying that Reeves and the Wellingtons had made it safely through. The passageway sloped upward more steeply now, and fresh air flowed stronger with each step, carrying the scent of pine and approaching dawn. The relief of escaping the oppressive darkness of the mine was tempered by the knowledge that open ground presented its own dangers. Visibility worked both ways in mountain terrain. She emerged from the tunnel into the grey light of early morning. The mine exit opened onto a small plateau halfway up the northern face of the mountain, with scraggly pines providing minimal cover. Scanning the area anxiously, Eliza saw no immediate sign of the others. Had they continued downward toward Cottonwood Springs, or hidden nearby waiting for her to join them? A low whistle from a dense patch of undergrowth to her right answered the question. Reeves materialized from behind a boulder, beckoning her to join him. The Wellington family was huddled in a natural depression behind the rocks, partially concealed by fallen pine branches that Reeves had arranged for additional cover. "You made it," Rebecca breathed, relief evident in her exhausted face. "We heard voices echoing from the tunnel. We thought—" "I convinced them to reconsider their options," Eliza explained briefly, not wanting to worry the children with details of her confrontation. "But it's only temporary. Once they verify my claims were exaggerated, they'll resume pursuit with even more determination." Reeves nodded grimly. "Then we need to reach Cottonwood Springs before that happens. We lost the wagon and horses, but there's a trail from here that should get us there by midday if we push hard." Eliza assessed the family's condition with a medical eye. Rebecca was running on pure maternal determination, her physical reserves nearly depleted by stress and inadequate nutrition. Emma and Sophia showed signs of exhaustion that went beyond normal fatigue, their movements sluggish and their eyes dull. Only Charlotte maintained anything resembling normal energy, though even she was clearly reaching her limits. "We'll need to carry the younger girls," Eliza decided, "and take frequent short rests rather than fewer long ones. Their bodies will recover faster with that pattern." With Reeves carrying Sophia and Eliza taking turns with Rebecca to carry Emma, They set off down the mountain trail that wound through dense forest toward Cottonwood Springs. The terrain was challenging, but not impossible. A game trail enlarged by occasional mining traffic that provided relatively direct access to the settlement while avoiding the main roads where Hargrove's remaining men might be watching. As they traveled, Eliza found herself walking beside Charlotte, who maintained a determined pace despite her obvious fatigue. The girl had wrapped her arms around herself for warmth, her thin jacket inadequate against the morning chill. Without comment, Eliza removed her own coat and draped it around Charlotte's shoulders. The girl looked up in surprise, her instinct to refuse the offering visible in her expression before practical necessity won out. "Thank you," she said quietly, pulling the oversized garment closer around her body. "But won't you be cold?" "Walking keeps me warm enough," Eliza replied, though the brisk air immediately penetrated her cotton shirt. "Besides, I've spent 15 years adapting to mountain weather. You're still accustomed to Boston comforts." Charlotte considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "Not anymore," she said finally. "I don't think we can ever go back to how things were before. Even if Mr. Hargrove never found us, we're different now." The observation carried wisdom beyond the girl's years, an understanding that profound experiences permanently altered one's perspective, regardless of external circumstances. Eliza recognized the same transformation that had occurred in her own life after leaving Boston and Thomas behind. "Different isn't always worse," Eliza offered gently. "Sometimes it's just the beginning of something you couldn't have imagined before. Like you becoming a traveling nurse instead of a proper Boston lady?" Charlotte asked with surprising insight. "Exactly like that," Eliza confirmed. 15 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Now I can see that I was simply finding a different path to what truly mattered all along." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as they continued their descent. The forest gradually thinned, revealing glimpses of a valley where threads of smoke rose from scattered buildings, the outskirts of Cottonwood Springs coming into view through the morning mist. Unlike the larger mining towns with their chaotic growth and temporary structures, Cottonwood Springs had developed with unusual intention. The buildings showed evidence of careful construction with proper foundations and painted exteriors. Streets followed logical patterns rather than haphazard convenience, and small gardens brightened the spaces between homes. It was a settlement built by people who intended to stay, not merely extract wealth and move on. On the northern edge of town stood a two-story structure with a distinctive red cross painted on its door, Dr. Sarah Blackwood's clinic. Even from a distance, Eliza could see it was a substantial operation, with a separate building for convalescing patients and a small greenhouse where medicinal plants grew protected from mountain frosts. 15 years earlier, that clinic had been nothing but an ambitious dream, shared by two women determined to practice medicine on their own terms. Eliza had provided the seed money from her modest savings, while Sarah contributed the medical training that Boston's hospitals had refused to utilize. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, a testament to what was possible when determination overcame convention. As they approached the outskirts of town, Reeves held up a hand for caution. "We should avoid the main road until we're certain who's watching," he advised. "There's a service path behind the clinic that Sarah uses for deliveries and discreet patient arrivals." The suggestion confirmed Eliza's suspicion that Reeves had worked with Sarah before, perhaps helping other vulnerable people reach safety when conventional channels failed them. It was a reminder of the invisible networks that existed throughout the frontier, good people quietly countering injustice without recognition or reward. They circled through a stand of aspens to approach the clinic from behind, careful to remain out of sight from the main street. The service path was exactly where Reeves had indicated, a narrow track leading to a sturdy door in the clinic's rear wall. A small bell hung beside the door, its purpose clearly to alert staff without drawing public attention. Eliza rang the bell with the pattern she and Sarah had established years ago. 3 short rings, followed by 2 long ones, a signal that identified her as surely as any password. Within moments, footsteps approached from inside, and the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s, her dark hair streaked with premature grey, and her capable hands bearing the distinctive calluses of surgical work. Dr. Sarah Blackwood took in the bedraggled group with a single comprehensive glance before stepping back to admit them without question. "Eliza Montgomery," she said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure, despite the obvious emergency. 15 years since you helped build this place, and you still arrive with people in need rather than for a social visit." "Some habits persist," Eliza replied with a faint smile, ushering the exhausted family inside. "Sarah, this is Rebecca. Wellington and her daughters, Charlotte, Emma, and Sophia, and Michael Reeves, who's been instrumental in getting us here safely. They need sanctuary and medical attention, not necessarily in that order." Sarah assessed the family with professional efficiency, noting signs of malnutrition, exposure, and exhaustion. "My assistant will prepare the recovery room upstairs," she decided, turning to a young woman who had appeared in the hallway. "Lucy, tell Margaret we need hot food, warm baths, and clean clothes for 3 children and 2 adults. Then prepare the examination room for multiple patients." As Lucy hurried to comply, Sarah turned her attention to Reeves. "Mr. Reeves, I believe we've crossed paths before. Though under different circumstances, your assistance is appreciated as always." Reeves acknowledged her words with a respectful nod. "I should check the town for signs of pursuit," he said. "Jenkins' men sometimes deliver supplies here. They might have information about other strangers in the area." While Reeves slipped out to conduct his reconnaissance, Sarah led the others upstairs to a comfortable room with multiple beds, separated by curtains for privacy. Large windows let in mountain light, while a wood stove provided ample warmth. The space showed the same careful attention to detail evident throughout the clinic. Practical necessities elevated by small touches of beauty that acknowledged patients' needs for spiritual as well as physical healing. "This was always my favorite room in the building," Eliza remarked, remembering the weeks she had spent helping Sarah establish the clinic. "You've maintained it beautifully." "With considerable help from the community," Sarah confirmed, efficiently checking Sophia's temperature and pulse. "The mining companies initially resisted a female doctor, but their position changed remarkably once I saved the mine owner's son from appendicitis. Suddenly, gender became less important than competence." The dry observation made Eliza smile, despite their precarious situation. Sarah had always combined exceptional medical skill with a pragmatic understanding of human nature, qualities that had enabled her to build this improbable sanctuary in a frontier mining town where traditional thinking might have rejected her. As Lucy returned with clean clothes and promises of food soon to follow, Sarah completed her initial examination of the children. "Malnutrition and exhaustion, but nothing that proper care won't remedy," she announced. "Mrs. Wellington, I'd like to examine you privately once the children are settled." The unspoken concern behind Sarah's request was clear to Eliza. The doctor was looking for signs of physical abuse beyond what was immediately visible. Rebecca nodded in understanding, her relief at reaching safety finally allowing some of her rigid self-control to relax. While Sarah attended to Rebecca in an adjacent examination room, Eliza helped the girls wash and change into the clean clothes Lucy had provided, simple but well-made garments donated by townspeople for patients in need. The transformation was remarkable. Beneath the grime of travel and fear, the Wellington girls emerged as the children they were meant to be, their natural resilience already beginning to reassert itself now that immediate danger had passed. Even little Sophia, who had been nearly catatonic with fear in the mine tunnel, showed signs of recovery, her curiosity about the clinic's equipment and furnishings overcoming her exhaustion. Emma had curled up on one of the beds as soon as she was clean, falling into the deep sleep her body desperately needed to heal. Charlotte, typically, remained alert despite her obvious fatigue, unwilling to rest until she was certain her family was truly safe. "You should sleep too," Eliza told her gently, guiding the girl to the bed nearest the window. "Your body needs rest to recover its strength." Charlotte resisted, her eyes fixed on the door through which her mother had disappeared. "I should wait for Mother. She might need me." "Your mother is in excellent hands," Eliza assured her. "Dr. Blackwood is one of the finest physicians I've ever known. She'll take good care of her." "Is she really a proper doctor, with a degree and everything?" Charlotte asked, genuine curiosity temporarily overcoming her concerns. "One of the first women to graduate from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania," Eliza confirmed. "She completed her training despite professors who claimed female minds couldn't comprehend medical science and male colleagues who refused to acknowledge her expertise." The information seemed to reassure Charlotte, who finally allowed herself to be settled into bed. "Like you did, leaving everything behind to help people who needed you," she observed sleepily, "even when everyone said you shouldn't." The comparison touched Eliza unexpectedly. "Get some rest now," she said, smoothing the blanket around the girl's shoulders. "Things will look clearer after you've slept." As Charlotte finally surrendered to exhaustion, Eliza moved to the window, studying the town spread below. Cottonwood Springs had grown significantly since her last visit. New buildings along the main street, a proper schoolhouse where once there had been only a community hall, gardens and small orchards suggesting permanent settlement rather than the transient population typical of mining towns. Sarah had built something remarkable here, not just a medical practice, but a community that valued healing in its broadest sense. The contrast with Eliza's own solitary existence was stark. While she had helped countless individuals during her years of wandering, Sarah had created a lasting institution that would continue providing care long after both of them were gone. The door opened quietly as Sarah returned, her expression thoughtful as she joined Eliza at the window. "Mrs. Wellington will recover physically," she said in a low voice that wouldn't disturb the sleeping children. "The bruises on her arms and back are healing well, but the psychological trauma will take longer to resolve. She's been living in constant fear for months, possibly years." Eliza nodded, having seen similar patterns in other women escaping abusive situations. "And her husband has resources to prolong that fear indefinitely unless something changes the equation." "Which brings us to the immediate problem," Sarah observed. "Your Mr. Reeves returned a few minutes ago. There are indeed strangers in town, asking questions, one at the hotel and another watching the main road. They match the description of Pinkerton agents." The news confirmed Eliza's fear that Vaughn had split his forces, sending men ahead to Cottonwood Springs while he led the gear pursuit through the mine. The family had reached safety temporarily, but their sanctuary was already under observation. "We need a more permanent solution," Eliza said, her mind already considering and discarding options. "Somewhere beyond Hargrove's reach, where Rebecca and the girls can build a new life without constantly looking over their shoulders." Sarah smiled faintly. "I may have an answer to that particular problem. Do you remember Clara Harrison?" The name triggered immediate recognition. Clara Harrison had been one of Sarah's first patients in Cottonwood Springs, a young widow whose husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with a small insurance payment but no means of supporting herself long-term. Sarah had treated Clara for grief-induced insomnia and Eliza had helped her establish a small boarding house for respectable women working in the growing settlement. Clara's boarding house has expanded into a legitimate hotel, Sarah explained, and 3 years ago she married Judge William Parsons, who presides over the territorial court in Helena. Between them, they have connections throughout Montana, territory, and a particular interest in helping women establish legal independence from abusive situations. The implications were significant. A territorial judge would have the authority to grant Rebecca legal protection that even Hargrove's Boston connections would struggle to overcome. Montana territory, still developing its own legal structures, offered opportunities for women that more established Eastern jurisdictions often denied them. "Do you think they would help the Wellingtons relocate to Helena?" Eliza asked, hope building despite her natural caution. "I've already sent a telegram explaining the situation in general terms," Sarah confirmed. Clara's response was immediate and unequivocal. She and the judge would welcome Rebecca and the girls, provide housing and employment, and ensure legal protection through formal territorial residency. Once established as Montana residents, they would be beyond Boston jurisdiction. In domestic matters, it was a solution more comprehensive than Eliza had dared hope for. Not merely temporary sanctuary, but a genuine opportunity for Rebecca to rebuild her life with community support and legal protection. The relief was so profound that Eliza found herself momentarily speechless. Sarah watched her friend's reaction with understanding. "There's one complication," she added. "The stage to Helena leaves tomorrow morning. If the Wellingtons are going to take advantage of this opportunity, they need to be on that stage, which means somehow evading the watchers Hargrove has already placed in town." The logistical challenge was substantial, but not insurmountable. "We'll need a diversion," Eliza said, her mind already formulating possibilities. Something significant enough to draw attention away from the stage depot at the critical moment. "I might have an idea about that as well," Sarah replied with a hint of mischief that reminded Eliza of their younger days planning the clinic. "But first, you need rest as much as your charges do. There's a bed waiting in my quarters, and I won't take no for an answer. Doctor's orders." The familiar phrase, one they had exchanged countless times during the clinic's early days, brought a genuine smile to Eliza's face. "I never was very good at following orders," she observed wryly. "But in this case, I'll make an exception." As she followed Sarah to the small but comfortable living quarters behind the clinic, Eliza felt a weight lifting that she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. For 15 years, she had carried not just Dr. Richardson's dying request, but also the solitary burden of choices that had cost her everything familiar. Here in Sarah's clinic, surrounded by evidence of what courage and conviction could build, that burden seemed lighter somehow, transformed from isolation into connection through the simple act of helping others find their own path forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the necessity of once again placing herself between danger and those who couldn't protect themselves. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza Montgomery would rest in the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she had been meant to do all along. The circle that had begun with a dying doctor's request 15 years earlier was completing itself in ways neither of them could have imagined. What had seemed like an ending, her separation from everything familiar, had always been a beginning disguised by the limitations of her own perspective. Now helping Rebecca Wellington forge a similar path from endings to beginnings, Eliza could finally see the pattern that had been forming all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.